So thank you all for attending this session today. I know you all had a great night last night, so thanks for getting up and joining us. My name is Austin Greenall, and I work with DNA Genotek. We make the Origene kits, and I've had the luxury of working with a few of the different HLA registries here. And over the years, I've found that there are certain specific challenges and problems that each HLA has to overcome, some slightly different than others, but each group seems to have a different method at solving these problems. So we had the idea of getting together a little session to chat about some of the solutions that these registries have come up with. So it's my pleasure to introduce Anne O'Leary, who's the head of registry development at the Anthony Nolan Registry in the UK. Dr. Evelyn Nari, who is the directrice of the bone marrow transplant group in the Agence de Biomédecine in France, and Dr. Ioannis Metelinios, who is the head of the Department of Transplantation and Immunology in Ulm. That will be enough for my introduction. I'd like to go right to Anne, who's got some points to chat about that she works with her registry.
So obviously I'm head of registry development at Anthony Nolan, so I'm specifically going to talk today on the registry growth side of things. I'm just going to start with a few of the challenges and opportunities that we now face with recruitment of volunteer donors, recruitment and retention of volunteer donors. The first thing, online donor recruitment is something that has become more and more part of our recruitment mix, and about how we bring new donors to the register, and also how new donors choose to join the register. The advent of the swab sample and the saliva sample has made online donor recruitment very easy. People no longer need to go and have a blood sample taken. We can send them a kit in the post and they can send it back to us. And that has meant that we've seen massive increases in the number of people choosing to join online over the last few years. This has also happened at a time when we are also focusing more and more on younger donors. And if we want to find young people, the place to find them is online. So it's a really powerful way for us to recruit new potential donors to the register. I suppose there's some really big benefits in terms of the large number of people that we can reach, the lower cost than face-to-face, traditional face-to-face recruitment. Online recruitment is a lower cost. And also it involves a proactivity from the donor, twice actually. So they have to take the decision to go online and to fill in the application form. There's no one standing over them to help them fill in that application. And then they also have to wait for the sample to be sent to them. They provide the sample and then return it to us. So in that way we can assume that it actually allows another level of commitment. They have to take the proactive steps to join the register. And actually in our recent research on attrition in the register, donors who signed up online were slightly more likely to provide a sample at CT stage than donors who signed up face-to-face. But there also are specific challenges with online recruitment that we need to be aware of, particularly for smaller registries or for new registries. There's a wastage rate, so obviously a certain percentage of people will not send back a sample, and you have to build that into the cost when you're looking at that. It also can be a tap that's very easy to turn on but very difficult to turn off. So once you have your online application process set up and you have your website set up, it's fantastic, but to turn that off, to make the decision to no longer allow people to sign up online would be an incredibly negative message. So you don't want to do that, but actually that does mean that you don't have the same level of control that you do over face-to-face events. And finally, targeted online donor recruitment is very challenging. Our experience in Anthony Nolan is that 70% of the people who sign up online are female, and obviously we know that men are by far more likely to be chosen to go on to donate. So we need to make a real effort to ensure that more male donors are joining up online. In saying that, online recruitment is clearly an important part of the recruitment mix. It is where people are, so we just have to be aware of these benefits and those risks with recruitment. The next thing I'm going to talk about as both an opportunity and a challenge for us is recruiting an environment with a variety of registry and donor centre options for potential donors from the recruitment side of things. Many people here will be operating in an environment where a potential donor has many options for who they would like to join with, if they would like to join a registry or a donor centre. And on a positive note, this can lead to real options for the potential donor. It means that you can highlight the need for stem cell donors in a way because there's more people talking about it, and it can offer us opportunities to network with our colleagues in the UK outside of the normal networking events like today. But there are also risks around working in that area, and challenges. with multiple organisations, you have multiple joining policies, potentially many different ways that people can join the registry, and that can lead to some confusion. So it's important for us to be really clear about how we work together, and also one really simple thing, that people only need to join one registry. In most cases, where there's multiple organisations operating, there's a significant donor pool to choose from. However, that it can still lead to some duplication of effort. Particularly where it comes to patients, individual patients, or specific organisations. And what we have to try and do is try and work together as closely as we can to make sure that patients feel supported rather than torn between two different organisations, or more than that. And also so the organisations that we're targeting for recruitment feel that they're inspired to do more with us rather than feeling like they're being flooded with requests to work together. Ultimately, working in an environment with multiple players can be challenging, but we need to try and work together as closely as possible to make sure that it's easier for the potential donors, and that there's no challenges for them, no steps in the way of them joining. And finally, in terms of just a significant challenge, donor retention is, for me, it's as simple as this. Donor retention is as important as donor recruitment. There's a variety of reasons why a donor may not be available when they come up at confirmatory typing stage. Some of them, like the medical reasons, emigration, there's not an awful lot we can do about them. There's some things we can do about them, but not an awful lot. But the other reasons where a donor is uncontactable, where they're not returning our communication, where they decide that they would rather not go ahead with donation for personal reasons. We know what this means. It can lead to massive disappointment for the patient. It leads to time wasting and potentially a delay to transplant. And then a waste of resources, both on chasing that donor when they come up as a potential match, but actually on recruiting them in the first place. Over the last few years, the profile of retention of donors has increased, and that's a really important thing. But there's a few things just that we need to remember. The easier that we make it for people to join the register, the better in some respects, but also the easier we make it for them to ignore the significance of joining the register. People aren't just joining a register, they're joining with an intention to donate, and we have to always make that clear. Also, the general public, and more specifically the patients and the families of patients that we work with, don't understand donor attrition in the way that we do. They see it as the more donors on the register, the more chances of finding matches. Every potential donor is a potential match, but that's only the case if we ensure the commitment of the people who are joining the register. And for our patients and for our transplant centres, the ideal donor, we know they're looking for younger donors, and we're always trying to reach out to more younger donors. But actually that presents a new challenge for us because we're communicating with people over a longer period of time. So at Anthony Nolan, our most common age of joining the register is 19. And that means when someone stays on the register until they're 60, we have 41 years of keeping in contact with them. So we need to look at all the different ways that we can keep in contact with them, do things like the NMDP are doing to recommit donors, but also to re-educate donors over the time on the register and make sure that they're there so that we're building sustainable registries that are cost efficient and that provide the best options for patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Great points. Dr. Murray?
Thank you. So I will focus my talk on three main issues linked to registered donors. And so I fully, of course, agree with what Anne just said concerning the importance of the donor retention, and particularly to the traceability that we have to ensure while registering donors, to make sure that we can contact them and we have the means to contact them anytime if needed. The more donors we have in the registries, in our registry, the more difficult this issue appears to be, because and then it's linked to the specificities registries within their country have to follow or to trace, let's say, the registered donors. For example, in France, as an example, over 12% of the general population is moving each year from one place to another. It's particularly true for young donors because they are involved in their studies and or building their life and moving from one place to another. So this issue appears very important. And we all have to keep in mind that it's very nice to have target number of new donors to get registered each year, but we have to take care of this issue. Also, the availability and the reliability of the donor's commitment or involvement is of high importance, and we have to inform them regularly about the registration they did, the commitment it appears to be over the time. And we have today tools, let's say, or means to fulfill this requirement in terms of email addresses or cell phone numbers, but also this Facebook community, Twitter, smartphone applications, and of course dedicated website where the donors can find information or get updated on what is needed, how things are evolving, and so on. In close similarity, we have to think about the quality of the donor's profile. We have very often talk about number of donors to register. We see statistics about that. Each registry or each even cord blood bank, but it's not a topic, but has to say how many donors do you pretend to include this year or over the years and so on. So this is fine because we have to grow and to this community and to replace those who are leaving the registries. But the quality of the profiles is of high importance, and I do not want to talk about the selection in terms of sex or age, which is an issue, of course, but much more focusing on the, first on the commitment of the donor, I was just talking about, so this part of the quality of the donors' profiles and linked to the level of information, as I said, but also the medical issues linked, and at least to analyze things from the beginning to the end if donation is foreseen. I think we are responsible not to register donors who present a contraindication at the time of their registration, and we have to make sure that we have evaluated this the proper way, so it may differ from one registry in one country to another, but at least it's very important. And over the time, because it's a long-term commitment, before eventually donating stem cells, as you all know, to evaluate the medical profile of the donor when they are requested for complementary testings or blood samples or whatever, to make sure that the donor has still the profile in terms of medical issue to donate. And this is also very important to set up and to make sure that you get the right information at the right time. And I would like also to introduce one of the thoughts is that it really belongs to the donor centers, physicians, to evaluate the medical profile of the donors and to contraindicate the donor if the medical issue is linked to the most common diseases. It doesn't belong to the transplant physician to decide at a late stage if he has to contraindicate this donor or not, apart specific contraindication that may exist in some countries and not in other. But through WMDA, there is a list of formal contraindication, and I would really like to emphasize that it's the responsibility of the donor center to make sure that they are respected, and that if there is a contraindication, the decision is taken by the donor center. And finally, I would like to speak about the place of bone marrow donation versus PBSC in terms of patients' needs. We all work for the patients, and including the donors, of course, because when they get registered, they have understood that they may help a patient. And we all know also that the physicians are the ones who select the best source of stem cells for their patients. If they need a bone marrow, they know why they need a bone marrow, because we know that the profile of the graft is not strictly the same, bone marrow or PBSC. And so the physician is responsible to determine which type of source of stem cell is the best for the patient. And it's the registry responsibility and the donor center responsibility to explain this to the donors. And I think we have to work on a more wide information and understanding of our donor community, that if they are requested for a bone marrow donation, and if it's the interest of the patient, they have really to think about and to be ready to donate bone marrow and not to say, oh, I just donate PBSC because I got registered for that and I do not want to hear about bone marrow. Of course, the donor is free to decide, that's for sure, but at least our responsibility is to make sure that we explain them the importance of such or such source of stem cell for the patient, for the dedicated patient he has. So the communication and the explanation, the information is a big part of this issue. And I think that we have really to think very deeply about these aspects, not only registering new donors, but thinking more precisely about the duration of the commitment, the quality of the information, and the physicians' and patients' needs in terms of stem cell sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mir. And I'll give the floor to Dr. Mitalinios, who has a few slides.
Hello, everybody. I will start with the issue of donor age that has been raised already by Anne. And also I would focus on the high-resolution upfront HLA typing registry donors and the advantages of that, the automation that is needed in registry donor sample processing, and also the implementation of NGS. Thank you. A couple of words about what my organization is. It's called DSST. It's one of the 30 German donor centers, and we are a network of 4 different donor centers, one in Frankfurt, one in Ulm, one in Mannheim, and one in Dresden. That makes a total of approximately 300,000 donors, which is the 3rd largest in Germany. As you can see, DKMS is by far the largest with 3.5 million, but then the others are following with 10% of what DKMS has. The issue of age, we're faced with the reality that our donors are getting older, which is normal. So this is the profile of the 4 premises of the DSSD when it comes to age distribution. And of course, then we can expect that within the next years, an increasing number of donors will drop out because they will reach the age limit. So we'll have something between 4,000 and 8,000 donors annually that will drop out because of this. And therefore, we'll need to make sure that we'll find a way to recruit younger donors in order to fill up for that. And of course, we still also want to increase, so we need to take that dropout into consideration when we have future recruitment strategies. The next issue has to deal with the effect of high-resolution typing up front. Back in 2009, we experienced a drop in donations that was not explainable at that time because we were growing. So we had a steady increase of donors being registered, but then all of a sudden there was a drop in donation. And at that time, we decided to start with high-resolution class 1 typing by sequencing. We did since then more than 100,000 donors. We typed them by sequencing, also a small fraction by Luminex high resolution, and since May this year, since May last year, by NGS. So a total of approximately 140,000 donors that were high resolution typed. And that's what happened. The donation rate jumped within 1 year in 50% on top and steadily increased. And I must say, last year we experienced a drop again, which is not really explainable. But in the previous years, that was the effect of the high resolution typing up front. So basically now we have half of our donors in the DSSD are high resolution type for class 1, and out of these 50% of donors, 80% of the donations come out. So the low resolution type donors are actually more or less useless nowadays. The effect on the search duration, we assume that this is the effect on the search duration that has also dropped from year to year. So we have currently most of the searches being completed within 25 days. And also the matching that has been achieved is becoming better because of this upfront high-resolution typing that is possible. So currently 75% of all our patients can be served with a 10 of 10 matched donor, and this percentage is getting better year per year. We all know the cases where in donor drives you have several thousands of samples that can accumulate like this and have to be processed. So we get things like this in the lab, and when you're confronted from one day to the next with this huge amount of numbers of samples, you need to have a way how to process them. So my point here is automation is needed and logistics. So you need to have a workflow when you have to deal with those samples, and possibly automate your workflow in a manner that allows you to avoid clerical errors, to avoid sample mix-ups, and eventually avoid typing errors that can make the whole search process and identification of a donor, the right donor, much more cumbersome. So in our lab we have several, we've defined the workflow, so I'm going to go quickly through that because it just takes time. And eventually when it comes to NGS and the implementation of NGS, this even becomes more difficult. This is just the workflow that we created for the data and processing within the NGS line that we are currently work with. And implementation of NGS is associated with certain advantages, but also with challenges. The major advantage is that you get more information, so you have less ambiguities and more loci that can be typed, so you have more matching information that you would need up front. Then you have a better quality of results, and definitely important is the costs. The costs have been dropping since the implementation of NGS, but this is very much associated with the number of samples that you have to process. So if your registry is a small one and the lab that you're working with is just having a couple of samples per year, then NGS is definitely not less expensive than other methods. So this needs to be very clearly stated. The challenges is that you have huge masses of data, so the data processing tools you need to implement, they are a challenge. You need to have IT infrastructure and people that are knowledgeable with that. You can process more samples eventually, so the workload increases somehow, and you need to make sure that your staff can accomplish that. You need automation. As I said, you need strong IT infrastructure, and the costs will be only dropped if you have sufficient number of samples. So that's what I want to say.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Right, at this point, I have a few questions for all of the chairs here. Start off with Anne. Anne, if you had could keep one recruitment channel, or you were starting a registry with limited resources, what would that be?
Obviously, there's lots of different ways to recruit, and there's to have an effective recruitment strategy, you have to have lots of different channels in your recruitment mix. But if in the position of a new registry, or if we only had one way that we could recruit, I think that our university programs would probably be the strongest way for us to recruit. And I know that a lot of registries here have a university program. In the UK, our program is called Marrow, and we have 45 student groups based in universities all around the country. There's some really obvious reasons why they're a very effective recruitment pool. They're obviously the age group, the age profile of the people who are joining, they're all between the ages of 18 and 23. And obviously that makes for very effective recruitment. But also they're at a time and a place in their life where they want to make this decision and they want to take this kind of an action. You're also looking at a very large recruitment pool, because you're an ever-churning recruitment pool. So building up good, sustainable groups in those regions can lead to ongoing recruitment, very sustainable recruitment. And it's also a big volunteer pool, so it means that with a small resource from our registry, we can get a lot of recruitment from our student groups. And I think one of the big benefits of our student groups that I don't know the full impact of yet, but I really want to explore, is how we build the brand of the registry with those students. Because as opposed to a patient appeal or an event where we go and do a single event in a organisation, and we're there for one day and then we're gone, or there's a patient appeal that's going for a month or two and then it's gone. With the student groups in universities, because they're carrying out events all the time, we're building the name of our brand within that university, and those students are seeing us year on year. So rather than only having that one opportunity to engage with them, we can engage with them over the course of their time at university, and hopefully that will allow us to build lifelong supporters from those people. So as well as getting donors, we hopefully will be getting lifelong supporters for our organisation.
Thank you, Anne. I've had the chance to work with some of these Merrill folks, and their enthusiasm is truly contagious. So you've done a fantastic job organizing them and getting them excited about your cause. Dr. Marie, so we've chatted about a few different strategies here with the different registries. Is it important for all the different registries to have the same type of strategy in their approach?
I think it's a very important question because we should all keep in mind that each registry has its own history and its own organization. And to try to think that developing the same strategy in one registry and in another, and maybe in all registries, is something that probably appears unfeasible and unrealistic. There are, I think, two kinds of registries, let's say. Some have a strategy in place, and probably most of the registries do have a strategy in place, which can be or not validated by the health authorities. But at least over the time, the registries do have some kind of strategy, and they have developed this strategy, whatever it is, because of the local realities, the funds available, the regulation, some political issues, some public health issues, and so on. So I think thinking about having the same strategy developed for all registries is a mistake. And I would like to link this thought to the registries going international. This is an issue, as you know, that has come the few years ago. And I think it's a mistake to think when you go international that you can exactly copy-paste what you have done in your country in another country. So the issue has to be discussed, particularly in each country facing this situation. But as we are talking about common strategies, I think each strategy has to be respected. Because when you are from a foreign country, you do not know exactly, even if we talk about this issue often within WMDA, but maybe not sufficiently in depth. I think each one has to make sure that he knows why a registry is working this way or another way, why such a registry is developing such strategy and not another one, in terms of donors, recruitment, in terms of cord blood, banking, or we were talking about the keeping of the keeping issue for registered donors and so on. So I would like to say as a conclusion to your question that we have to respect the strategy which are in place in other countries, and respect in terms of trying to understand why, and second, make sure that we don't jeopardize the strategy in place when we go international.
Perfect, thank you very much. Sounds like a very interesting problem that's unique for each group. Dr. Mitlinios, I've got a question that's very close to my heart. You're speaking a little bit about the technical process and the workflow in your lab. What is the optimal method to obtain donor material for HLA typing, in your opinion?
Well, the material that is used traditionally is, of course, blood, and that is the material that is, in terms of lab work, the easiest to process, and also the material that gives you as much material, as much DNA as you require for further testing and this and that. So in my personal preference is still blood. We have experienced difficulties with the amount and the quality of DNA that is being extracted from buccal swabs. And in addition to that, the buccal swab processing is partly manual, so it is somehow error prone, as I mentioned before, if you have to deal with several hundreds of samples at the same time, and that's another disadvantage of the buccal swab as a material. Saliva is also very good in our hands, so we can process saliva in the same manner as blood. So our preferences are blood or saliva, and if that is not possible, buccal swabs.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anne, we'll go back to you. What role could international collaboration play in promoting the best practices for donor recruitment and retention?
So I suppose we already collaborate on donor recruitment in terms of coming here and networking, and when we all recruit to our WMDA standards. But I think that there's also possibly more space for more formalized conversations around recruitment and retention, because they're so important to how we develop our registries. Part of the challenge with sharing best practice can sometimes be the terminology that we use, and when I say donor attrition, what I mean by that might be something different to what somebody else means by that. So maybe standardizing some of the terminology and the definitions that we have for even a word like recruitment. Does that mean tissue typed? Does that mean just samples received? What actually that word means? I think standardizing those would make things easier. You know, my favorite topic is donor retention and how important that is, and I think it'd be interesting to look into what sort of donor retention standards that we could include in the WMDA standards, knowing that donor attrition is such an issue for registries, but also mainly for patients when looking for a match.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Dr. Marie, how do you deal with the need for genetic diversity at the registry level? You know, it's a challenge these days.
Yeah, I think it's really a challenge. We all know that we had to fulfill as far as we can the patient's needs, and we all know, because it's the reality in all countries where a registry exists, that some patients do not have, we cannot find for them a matched donor, particularly because they have HLA specificities linked to their history, let's say genetic history. So I think we have first, I mean, of course, and the WMDA is there for that, to support and to encourage the development of registries in countries where a registry is lacking. We know that it's difficult and lacking because of the economical situation and the support or the lack of support sometimes from the health authorities, which do not have understood maybe the importance. But beside that, for those registries which are, let's say, Caucasian, mainly Caucasian registries, we have within our countries population which are coming from Africa or even from Asia, but Asia is now, I think, trying to cover the needs. But for Africa, we have seen in the WMDA annual report that Africa is lacking of registries, except the South African, of course, registry. But otherwise, from people outside this country, it's very difficult to find a match outside the family setting. So we have in our population, and particularly, for example, I will take the example of France, but I know that it's true for many, many other countries. We have people who have these origins that we are looking for. And I think we have the responsibility to inform them about the importance of thinking about getting registered on the national registry, because they are the only one who can probably help the patients lacking of a donor. We are facing sometimes problems because, for example, in some countries, and France is not the only one, we are not allowed to register the ethnicity of donors. So it's very difficult to see which percentage of donors from specific origins are within the registry and the percentage of, let's say, Caucasian donors. So for those registries who are not able to do this, not because they cannot, of course, collect the information, because they are not allowed by law, we are facing some kind of difficulties, because we cannot collect this data even on different ways. So the public awareness linked to the patient's needs is of high importance, again, And we have to contribute as far as possible, and we know that it's not easy, to increase this awareness within this population, within these communities, and in trying to make them understand the importance of the mobilization for patients.
Thank you. A serious problem indeed, but one I'm sure everybody in this room is working on. Dr. Milenios, I saw the photo up there of the thousands of blood samples. How do you deal with wrongly typed donors, or are you concerned about sample mix-up and processing?
Well, obviously we are, but since technology has developed in the last years, we are, as I mentioned before, in a fortunate situation that we've implemented automation. Of course, you need to have a quality system in your laboratory and also in your registry. You need to describe a mechanism how to deal when a situation comes where the donor has been wrongly typed. In our registry, in our donor center, we get out the sample from the freezer, we retype the sample, we check whether the initial result corresponds with the result of the frozen sample. And if the mix-up or if the error cannot be resolved, we would call the donor again and take a new sample to resolve the ambiguity, resolve the error.
Fair enough.
To make sure. I remember we have had once a case where father and son had the same name, and when we sent the vials for a CT request, the father thought that it is for him, so he sent the blood. He sent his blood. And of course, it was an error, and it took us some while to get around that.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And with the numbers, 25 million people on the worldwide registries now, which, congratulations first of all, but that must be tough to manage a database and certainly all the communications of. Thank you for all your answers. I'd like to now open up the floor to any questions that you might have.
Question. There.
Please feel free to direct at any one of us or the group in general.
I'm Alex Spiridonidis from Greece. I would like to ask you, what would you suggest for a new registry? You said low resolution typing is not good enough, high resolution typing. How many loci, and if you would suggest for a new registry to type, to make up front also blood group test and rhesus test?
My suggestion would be to go directly for at least A, B, C, D, R, D, Q, high resolution. I don't think that it makes sense to start a new registry with less than that, unless it is a minority registry,
And what about blood group?
Well, as I said before, the platform very much depends on the size of the samples and on the size of the lab that you send on the samples. So if you have a small lab and you process only very few samples in your lab, then any of the standard methods, probably sequencing SPT would be okay, because currently the NGS platforms for low number of samples is not really financially very attractive.
No, I'm asking about blood group.
What material?
ABO.
Oh, blood group, sorry. Oh my God, sorry, didn't get that. I don't think it is necessary. With the reduced intensity conditioning, it becomes more and more interesting for the clinicians. I don't think it is really necessary. It became fashionable to do that, but I don't really see the added value in that.
Thank you.
What about the CMV?
Well, CMV would be meaningful, in my opinion. But again, as you can imagine, the CMV may change after a while. So, if somebody is positive, then he's positive. But CMV negative doesn't mean necessarily that the donor will be negative 5 years later. But it's definitely something that you can do in order to improve attractivity of your donors.
In our region, most of the people are CMV positive.
Positive.
So might be.
Yeah.
Certainly a difficult challenge to overcome, and interesting to see whether it's more valuable to type them at the initial outlay so that you can eliminate them for the database and avoid the costs of coming back to them, or like you said, I mean, there's a decent chance they might get the disease later on in life.
And the point with CMV is that you need an extra vial of blood. So if you are using saliva or buccal swabs, then you would need to drain some blood from the patient, from the donor as well. And normally, if you do the typing and the CMV at the same time, you need to send the CMV to somebody else than the HLA typing, which makes the whole thing logistically a little cumbersome.
On that point, actually, we've been working lately on CMV detection from saliva and had some very promising results. So potentially we'll have some more information on that, and you might be able to use one sample type. Perfect. Well, I guess we'll have to chat about that later.
Very good.
Any other questions from the group?
I've just got a question for Anne, and it's about the commitment of younger donors. I think something that we've heard in the past is that 16 and 17-year-olds are less committed. What's been the experience?
No, our experience hasn't been that case. So we now recruit in Anthony Nolan. We recruit from the age of 16 up to the age of 30, and I think that we've had a number of 17-year-old donors, no 16-year-old donors as yet, but we've had a number of 17-year-old donors. What we've heard from collection centres is that they do sometimes require a little bit more hand-holding than older donors, but that would be the case whether they were 18 or 19 as well. And actually, if this is what the transplant centre is looking for and what they're looking for their patient, I think we need to take on that additional responsibility to just look after those donors a little bit more. But I think we've been doing this now for 3 years. We've been recruiting from the age of 16, and I think what we have to make sure that we're doing is building in that retention strategy over time, because the recruitment practices. You can have the best recruiter in the world, and I think we've got some really great recruiters at Anthony Nolan, but relying on that 10-15-minute conversation that they have when they recruit someone to the register for up to 44 years of commitment is just not something that we can do. So we need to make sure that we are constantly communicating with them, asking them to recommit, looking at other ways that we can educate them more over their time on the register, so that we're building committed donors. In terms of whether a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old is less committed than an 18 or 19-year-old, we've had no evidence to show that.
Thank you.
May I ask something?
I think that's acceptable.
And how do you deal with that, 16 years old donors? How do you approach them? Are you concerned, or is there any concern about their parents being upset or this or that?
So for 16 and 17-year-old donors, our main recruitment policy for those donors, or our main recruitment method, is through schools. So we actually have a program called Register and Be a Lifesaver, where we educate 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds about blood, organ and bone marrow donation. So we talk to them about all the different types of donation. And then we don't recruit on the day of the presentation, but actually the last slide of the presentation is telling them to go home and talk to their families about what they signed up to.
Okay.
Also, the last step in our recruitment process, whenever we recruit someone, is to give them a leaflet that we encourage them to bring home and talk to their family about. So we put a big emphasis on commitment. And when we changed our joining policy to recruit 16 and 17-year-olds, I think that we thought that was pure. We were purely doing this kind of extra commitment level for 16 and 17-year-olds, but actually it's proved really important across the board, no matter what age somebody is when they sign up.
And you don't need the consent of the parents, do you?
We don't need the consent of the parents, but we always encourage young people and anyone joining the register to talk to their family about the decision that they've made, but there is no need for consent.
Then I have another question for Dr. Marie. I know in France, some of the different groups have a little bit of autonomy, whereas you're obviously trying to lead changes that you can make one decision and affect the entire country. How do you go about doing that from a central location?
In France, the different groups have no autonomy.
Oh, sorry.
But it doesn't mean that implementing changes is easy. I think it's always a challenge to set up new changes or new challenges. In France, for example, we have a network of donor centers, collection centers, transplant centers. And we work in close cooperation with them, and there is an homogeneity in terms of behaviors or practices or recommendation to be followed in terms of donor activities or transplant activities and collection activities. Each time there is a change, and particularly major changes in terms of, we were talking about strategies, for example, national strategies. So in France, clearly, the strategies are impulsed by the national health authorities, clearly. No one can decide on its side that it will change something which is of importance in terms of general organization. So anyway, how we deal with these changes, even if it's coming from the national health authorities, we have, of course, to discuss with all groups, to explain, to hear about their needs and their realities, of course, and to adjust the strategies according to what they say. So we do work in close cooperation with them. We have working groups or even meetings, specific meetings. And I think this is the best way, you know, to initiate changes and to make changes happen, is to really accompany and to be sure that there is always a transition period. You cannot just stop something and start something new without, you know, being sure that you are not destroying or jeopardizing what is existing for a benefit that you in fact, you cannot really measure. So I think it's a challenge, you know, to take new directions, and even if people in some countries or centers are more independent from the national registry or from the let's say, health politic, I think changes should be discussed anyway and accompanied in a way.
Absolutely, with so many options and new ideas out there, it's got to be a serious challenge. Check on the time. We do have a couple more minutes if there were any more questions from the audience. If not, then I guess
I have another question.
Up the floor. Certainly.
I think, Evelyn, you mentioned the fact that young donors would move around the country. How do you have a mechanism in France to trace them, or how do you get to contact them eventually? And how is it in England as well?
So the statistical we get from the National Post, because they know which people are moving and where and so on. So the means we are developing is working with the National Post to get information. And particularly we can get the information if the people do not have mentioned that they do not want the new address to be shared with any other organization or entities. So it's one of the way that we have to get connected with this change of addresses. And then we communicate, of course, a lot with our donors using emails, you know, to make sure we have about 75% of, or maybe now 80% of our donors do have an email address, and we keep sending them, not too much, but at least 2 or 3 times a year, an email, a newsletter, in order to make them aware of different things, but particularly to the fact that if they have changed addresses or coordinates, let's say, that they have to inform us. And we have developed on our website a specific, how do you call that? A specific place for registered donors where they can update their addresses and coordinates. So using, of course, passwords that we provide them. It's a safe entry point. And so using all these different tools, we are quite successful now with keeping the record. But it's a big job. Yeah, it's cumbersome and quite not easy.
In the UK, we do a lot of similar things, but we also run proactive update your details campaigns with particularly younger donors between the age of 16 and 30, because one of the things that you can guarantee is that they will move. When we recruit people at 16, they will move. So we also ask for alternate contact details for everyone who joins the register, so that we always have a backup. If the contact details that they give us at the time of joining are no longer accurate, we've always got somebody else that we can trial. And then I think part of what we're doing at the moment is to try and improve the method of collection of new data for new potential donors. The more recruitment we do online, the more accurate information we get, because there's no issues with incorrect postcodes because of lookup systems and things like that. But we also, if somebody comes up as a potential match and we can't find them, we employ all the resources that we can find through address finders, but also through social media and through everything that the internet can offer us in terms of searching for people.
I can assume we can always ask Google. They seem to know everything about us. How do you deal with it in your registry, Jonas?
I think in Germany we are fortunate that the authorities have a mandatory registration of all the people. So if you move around, you need to register with the authorities.
Okay.
And when they register with a donor register, they also have to sign that they agree that we go to the authorities to look for them if they moved around. And this is how it works. So we contact their previous city, the authorities of the previous city, if they've moved, and ask where did he move to, and then we go to the next city where he moved to and ask the new address. And that works pretty nicely.
Very convenient system inside Germany. Absolutely. As we wrap up, I'd just like to quickly summarize. It seems that communication is massively important when running and organizing an HLA registry in terms of communicating the donor commitment, communicating especially to minorities to encourage them to join the registry and the importance of finding them, and then communicating with them over the sometimes 41 years that they're on the registry and ensuring that you can stay in contact with them. Also the quality of donor information and the quality seems to be very, very important, as Jonas touched on a little bit, as well as having good groups supporting you, such as the Merrill folks from the universities. So unless there are any more questions, we could wrap up this session. And thank you very much for joining us today. And of course, a big thank you to our 3 participants here. Thank you very much for joining us.